Alrighty, guys, welcome back to another episode of Reality One. In this episode, we're going to be talking about this concept of augmented reality and connecting two things together, connecting two devices together, particularly non-smart devices. We're going to get into a little bit later. What does that mean? This episode is going to be a little bit more interesting because it's a very novel idea. It doesn't exist yet. We're not just bringing practical ideas that people do day to day. This is a kind of new use of technology. And this is being allowed by augmenting and merging the two worlds together. Today, I'm accompanied by a guest, Yossi Loloyan. Before we introduce him, I'm just going to remind you guys that the guests on this podcast, they have a very interesting role. Their role is to be the audience's advocate. So it's almost like one of you guys gets to sit down with me while I'm recording a podcast. And anytime I use terms that are not as well known, if there's any definition, if I'm going too fast, if a concept seems too vague or out there or too meta, Yossi, in this episode, is going to stop me. He's going to pause me and go and ask questions, chime in, even come up with some great ideas. So, Yossi, how about you introduce yourself very quickly before we get rolling?
Hey, my name is Yossi Loloyan. You already knew that. I'm just here along for the ride to hear all about what the future holds.
What the future holds, indeed. To remind you guys, this podcast, Reality One, is a podcast that explores this future where augmented reality will be used in various aspects of life. We're looking at a future, particularly where we are going beyond, we're moving beyond the laptop, the smartphone, the current paradigm that we're used to of flat 2D screens, and looking at what kind of a world will we be in when our computers are no longer this thing that we put on a desk in front of us, where we use keyboard and mice mainly to interact with them, where they're used in an office to do certain work. What does this look like in our day-to-day life? And this is what Reality One is here for. Augmented reality is an incredibly powerful tool that's going to be improving our lives and bringing much more possibilities to our life. This journey is to explore how this technology is going to be used, not in a sense of entertainment, but in a sense of how will this impact our day-to-day lives. And so I think today's topic is quite interesting to me because this is something that came to me one of these days, and it's not something that I've yet seen properly, but I think it's going to be a concept that we're all going to be so used to in the future. And that's this idea of connecting two items. Just to give you guys a little bit of an example, the Microsoft Surface a few years ago shipped with this special dial. I don't know if it was called a Surface dial or what the actual name was, but it was this dial that you would put on the Surface, and it was built specifically as an input mechanism. It was different than the mouse. And when you would put it on the Surface, on the Microsoft Surface, let's say on a slant, you could press down, you could use it as buttons, but you could also rotate the dial and choose inside of a menu. It could become a color picker. It had a lot of different use cases, but the idea was this was a smart piece of technology. This was a couple $100 that you bought with your Microsoft Surface. It had a particular job. It had a specific input that it was designed for, and it was always a smart device. It was designed to use with Microsoft, and that's pretty cool. But imagine if you can connect any item around your house, any item around your office, or any item you happen to find next to you within arm's reach that does not have a predetermined input method, and it's not being specifically designed for a use case of an application or something. But with the power of augmented reality and understanding that there is a connection between these two, maybe to connect these two devices, you tap them together and they get infused by this. They have this ethereal connection between them. The video that I made of this concept in the 2025 series was a video based on the stovetop and a dial. And the idea was imagine if you have a stove just like we have here, And if one of the dials broke, you have two options today. One is to go to the store, go and purchase or get on Amazon, figure out the exact model, buy a dial and replace the broken one. Or you can get a set of pliers or something and come into it. But this idea was a third idea of saying, what if there was something else within reach that had a dialistic nature, a circular nature that could stand in for this dial? And so in the video, I found a salt shaker. I tapped it to the dial to make this linking connection. Now this salt shaker stands in place. So maybe I tap on top of the salt shaker to turn on the pilot light. And as I rotate the salt shaker, the dial that normally I would see on an oven appears around it, a digital dial that lets me crank up and down the flame. Now I can then at the end, when I want to disconnect them, I might shake the salt shaker and put it back in the cupboard. It's now a regular salt shaker again.
So nobody takes a salt shaker and starts a fire by mistake.
Exactly. Yeah. if you leave it there and they're still connected and your kid comes and taps it, tries to get a few, he wants to salt his chips and suddenly he started cooking tomorrow's dinner.
Oh man. You'd have to have, this is assuming that by then all of our devices would have the ability to connect to it.
So over here, it's interesting. There's a few kind of use cases. I guess the question is, how do you make it happen?
It would have to be a smart oven and whatever, anything it would be. They probably have that ability for all appliances.
Yeah. So I would say you want at least one of these items to be the smart item that's able to receive it. And your augmented reality is that pairing. What I did by tapping them together could be one version. I'm thinking of the beaming between the two iPhones, the new from iOS 17, where you tap two iPhones together and they have this cool animation, but they've made the pairing connection between them and you can send your name across. It's got this cute animation that shows that there's a small little connection.
Yeah, they kind of like moves from one.
Yeah, this like warping cut. Oh my God.
Very cool.
I think that animation is the sickest. And there is something, I don't know what Apple has done in the last, specifically I think from iOS 17. I don't know if I've really seen it beforehand, but before they used to have very thoughtful animation. And like definitely animation that when you look at it, this is something that only Apple gets right. But from last year, maybe there might be one or two instances before then, but from iOS 17, there is delightful animation that I have never seen before. One is this beaming animation as it goes between them. A new animation I really like is the new Siri one. So I think it's only going to be this animation in iPhone 15 and over, where the border lights up and shows Siri's listening to you like in a kind of a rainbow glow. Also, when you activate Siri, it has this like rippling effect and the whole phone looks like it's like rippling underneath this Siri interface. It is so cool to see it, like maybe unnecessary, but so beautiful. And it's done in such a crazy way. They've also introduced a new design when you press the volume buttons or the power buttons. Because it's an OLED screen and blacks are black, it looks like you're actually pushing into the screen. It's super interesting. Yeah. It's like something that like it didn't need to be there. It's not like it necessarily helps, but it really makes a connection between that physical button. I'm wondering maybe it's actually put there to prepare us for the capacitive buttons. Now that I'm thinking about it, because now you have the feeling of the button. It's a physical button.
They want to make it haptic.
They want to make it capacitive buttons, which means there's nothing actually physically. It's like the trackpad on the MacBooks. They don't physically go. The haptic is what gives you the feedback that it feels like it's clicking.
Right.
But the actual button itself doesn't physically click.
It's just sensors.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if the UI, the animation for clicking in is going to be obviously in addition to the haptics, but I wonder if it's in preparation for when there is no real physical button and the UI is just helping the haptics.
Yeah, I think you just pinpointed what it is about Apple that puts them on top. It's that at every point they're experimenting, but they're only experimenting with a beautiful design. They're never like in a beta version to the masses. They're never doing that. It's always, we're going to give you a finished product, and this finished product is also a test for the next thing and for the next thing. And it's always future driven.
It feels to me thoughtful. The design is very thoughtful. The last few designs have been interesting. This was just reminding me of the way it connected. Maybe we'll look at to see what would be an Apple way of connecting two items. But over here, the concept behind this is how can I control a smart object with a dumb object? And a big part of this that I need to say before we go on and look for examples or think of some crazy use cases is...
I wanted to actually ask you something.
Go on.
The limitations here are obvious. There would have to be a clear line of vision between the object you're using as the controlling object, especially if it's a dumb object. So for example, if a banana becomes the remote of the TV somehow, right? The only way for there to be an input that the banana is being used is if I'm looking at it through glasses or through something being sensed, and it can't be sensed in any other way other than visual.
Yeah, that's precisely where the smarts are coming from. The layer that's connecting them together is happening on the augmented reality side,
right?
Using computer vision.
Yeah, the processing is happening all in the AR.
Yes.
And it's just using the visualization of the object that you locked onto.
Yeah. And a big thing over here to recognize is the idea is not let's just play around with anything fun. A big part of it, I would argue to say the most powerful part of it is that you're actually using the items, physical space in the world, right? You're using its material, its physics, its texture, whether it falls on the floor. You're borrowing something that already exists in the world and you're infusing it with magical qualities.
Yeah.
It's like an inanimate object that's come alive.
So what would you need though? What are the prerequisites for that to work? Number one, I mean, it has to be glasses or the Apple Vision or something along those lines. Or like we mentioned before, if they would manage to put it into contact.
So you need a huge amount of sensors plus computer vision to understand the world you're looking at. And computer vision obviously cannot end off at just having a bounding box around an object and saying, we recognize this as a banana, right? That is the first step, right? That computer vision to go, we understand it's a banana. But the extra sensors, that is the depth sensor, whether it comes through a LiDAR or whether it comes through just depth sensing from the RGB, you have to get a full sense of the objects, its material, its physics, its depth, how everything exists. So when I rotate the object, I'm understanding that rotation. When I'm holding it, I understand what my fingers are doing behind it or wrapping around it. And I'm able to use a lot of those. So we might program in what we might want to do from a cylindrical object. We know that we can twist it. Some objects we might be able to grip and squeeze. Other objects, it's more about adding on the information around it that makes it very powerful.
I just had a funny visual. Pick the dreidel, you can scroll like really quick.
Instead of going through 2 items at once, you're scrambling around for a dreidel because I need to go down 100 items. I need to go super scroll. Yeah, dreidel could be interesting. The idea of just like volume, right? A volume control. Any type of dial or really any surface can become those controls. And the interesting thing is those things exist in our world. So nowadays, a lot of our controls, for example, when we have music playing, we have, let's say I'm looking at my MacBook and I've got dedicated keys for playing, pausing, and the volume up and down. However, those connect with the item that I'm currently listening to. I might have music coming from Spotify, but then I might have a YouTube video playing. I might have another tab open that's got another video playing, and then I might have a podcast going on. How do you know what you're controlling? So in a 2D world, the only way of doing it is to navigate towards that app, to bring that front and center, and to make that the app that now the controls are connecting to. In a spatial world with augmented reality, if my music is in a very spatial place, right? If they're located around me, it's a lot easier to control the item by looking at it, dealing with the eyes for intent. So if I'm looking at, if my Spotify is coming from a specific location, I can say instead of my Spotify coming out of, let's say it being just another application on my laptop, Spotify could be coming from that plant. That plant becomes my Spotify speaker. So the main controls happen to be where it is. Why am I putting it there? There's lots of reasons of why I want to make it spatial. Sometimes I want to make something because it's within reach. And sometimes I want to do something because I want to make it out of reach. I want to put it somewhere where I know how to come back to, or I don't want to control the whole time, so therefore I'll put it further away. But the volume control can be anything, right? So here I have a stand next to me, a bookcase. This could become my volume control as I reach out, and suddenly I have something physical. A problem with a lot of interfaces for augmented reality, because they're dealing in the air, is if you follow, let's say, if you looked at Minority Report, he had these special gloves and he had all these gestures. Now, it looks very cool from a movie point of view, but when you start actually designing and developing for this world, you realize very quickly, and I don't think there's a designer out there that doesn't know this yet, that's worked in this area for more than a day, but very quickly you understand that big gestures with your hands are a no-no because your hands will get very tired very quickly. So micro gestures, having your hands rest down are very important, but then you've obviously got to have sensors that are able to get that in your point of view, right? So earlier prototypes of goggles had a very hard time tracking your hands, and they would tell you, have your hands out in front of you, and you would have to make your gestures. But let's say with the Vision Pro, they've got sensors aimed downwards to be able to sense you have micro gestures. Let's say look at a keyboard, or really any type of thing that I'm scrolling. If I don't have a physical way of connecting with that, if I'm not touching something, and if I don't get haptic feedback, if I'm not getting feedback, it makes it very hard to control a device. If I could use my lap as a feedback mechanism, right? If I could tap on it, touch it, if buttons appear underneath my fingers, that's a lot more preferable than having buttons in midair. If I could have a cup in front of me, that becomes that interface. We could do a lot of fun things with a cup. This sounds like it's bordering on skeuomorphism, but let's say I have a cup next to me and I make that my music controller. I could have either the volume or the time up to the song that I'm in, where I'm up to. It could like almost fill up the cup. And that could be, if the volume goes up, the cup looks like it's filling with juice. And if I come down, it could be where I'm up to in the track and I can skip through it. I could rotate it to rewind or fast forward. Those are very basic ideas of music control. But any type of menu manipulating any item, round dials are very interesting. But if you just look around, anything within grasp can now become the way you connect it through things. So the stove, we have a dial. For music, it could be any type of cylindrical item or really anything around you. You could start using that as your interface for also the cover art. So I could say, okay, this book over here now becomes my music controller. So my music now lives in that book. That book is now the personification of my music speaker. So my controls are there. I might bring it close, and if I swipe on it, I get a nice velvety feeling because it's got a velvet cover. But all my controls now exist on that book, around that book. And the physics of that book, I can drop it. Maybe dropping means something. Maybe throwing it means something. Maybe rotating it means something.
It takes a whole new meaning to throw in the book.
Definitely it does. I'm just trying to think of what are, like, just look at everything that we have next to us.
So if we're looking at a controller with a bunch of buttons, you can just decide that those buttons mean something else, not controlled to the actual hardware. I was also wondering, the interesting thing you mentioned the Vision Pro, how what they've managed to do is make it less of an imposition on the person and made it more natural. So again, I'm coming back to the hardware part of this. How would the hardware look? How could you create the hardware in a way where it's minimally invasive to the point where it almost disappears into the background? Because I'm thinking, let's say you're in a room, you could have, let's say, cameras each wall, and then that's it. Somehow, and I don't know, like you said with LiDAR, and that's it. You can have nothing on you. Anyone walks into the room and that's what it is. And I'm sure that this would require a pretty intentional hardware setup to work. Unless you're talking about something like that Apple Vision Pro, which then,
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at a lot of the like virtual reality devices that came out in the beginning, you had two ways of tracking the world. There was room tracking, where you would actually put cameras or specific sensors around the room, and they would map out the room, and then you would have reflective pieces on your glasses, and they would use that to track yourself in the room. It was like world tracking. And then you also have tracking that was on your glasses looking out into the world. And we've seen the basic trend has been moving to putting on all the sensors internally onto your persons, and you're looking at the room, getting an understanding.
It's much less costly, right? You can do that anywhere.
Exactly. So there's pros and cons for both. If you have a space that you're going to have 50 people in and they're going to constantly be in that room, it makes sense to set up a room sensor. But then you also remember is those sensors were only position. When you have sensors, you still need sensors like cameras on the glasses looking out to understand the world, right? For that computer vision, which is imperative.
Is it not possible to get to a place where just the room, just the location?
You're saying cameras that exist on the walls or on the corners?
Walls, corners with LiDAR, let's say.
You can have them, but what happens if you want to leave the room? Also, will those cameras pick up everything? And again, they only work for that office space. My vision of the future of work is where we are as productive on the go as we are sitting down. So since the beginning of computers, the beginning we got comfortable in like computers that were the size of buildings. From then, we've gotten to this point of we are productive when we're sitting at a desk. Some of us are still very productive when we're sitting on a couch, on a beanbag, but still, it takes a special kind of person to be productive on the go. you've got this blend in between of like nomads, which can pick up and travel. But when they travel, they need to find an office location. They need to find a place where they can sit down, charge their devices, and they're productive in that case.
Part of that has to do with the way the human brain works, which is focus and zooming in is necessary to be productive. But I do know what you're saying. Like I have tried, I do a weekly show, and when I've been the most productive, sometimes I'm really late and I'm running to do the show, and sometimes I do it right at the beginning of the week. And almost always it's because I've started on my phone. But it's very frustrating to do. It's a small screen, even though it works, but it takes a certain, you need to, like you said, it takes a certain level of willpower. It takes a certain level of, I'm going to get this done no matter what. It's not an easy process. Yep. What you're talking about is you can be on the go and have the same accessibility and ease as being on a computer, which I mean is what the vision, I think that this is the thing that Apple always does, or coming back to Apple, is they take an idea and they perfect it. And the Apple vision is that process of I think there's a lot of things that are still really not good about it, mainly the hardware, because it's just heavy, and a lot of, even some of the software isn't where it is. But I think the one thing is there, it provides you with infinite iterations of a screen, and you can do that on a plane, and you don't need to bring your laptop. You can just keyboard and you're good.
Yeah, I have quite a few things to talk about on the Apple Vision Pro.
Right.
That we're not going to get into at the present moment.
It's not an Apple Vision Pro.
It's not and I think the Apple
Vision, it lends so much to it.
It does. For me, I think the Apple Vision Pro has a lot of failings in the old paradigm that I think are going to keep it, it's shackling a little bit. Mm-hmm. Now, I think a big part of answering your question, that there's a certain way, but even today, to get into that productive mode is not necessarily the easiest. And like iPhones are frustrating. You want to get to your computer, which you're familiar with getting creative and productive on. I think a big part of it is that the old paradigm is, in a way, the computers were the masters and we were the slaves. And I say that in a way of, we do what we can today to find out how to make the computer as comfortable as possible. Let's find a stable surface that the computer can sit on so it's not rocking around and not upset. Let's be next to an outlet so we can charge it so its battery doesn't die. Let's be close enough that we're comfortable enough to type on a keyboard that's designed to speak to it in a certain way, using an interface that's been developed in a certain way. We're used to this idea of the only way we can get productive is when we finally figure out the right setup. You look at people and they have, this is my beautiful, nowadays it's all about the beautiful PC setup. These users and workers are showcasing, this is the room that I finally designed that I can be focused in. And because I've bought a beautiful computer stand and I've got my standing desk that goes up and down, and oh boy, I can even sit on it while it go up and down because it's so strong. And look at the RGB lights that I've got in the room. They're beautiful. They're gorgeous setups.
Oh, wait, there's still value in them.
There is incredible value, but I see them almost as beautiful prisons.
Listen, you know what? Having a space that you love, I think, is imperative for long-term inspiration and productivity. Again, we live in a fast-paced world, which we can't afford to just be limited to that. So yeah.
True, and there's no problem having a beautiful room. I don't have a problem with that. The issue is why I call it like a beautiful prison, is that we've designed our space to be beautiful in a way that we can sit there for hours, because that's where we've come to. We've come to a place that the only way of being productive is if we sit in a quiet, empty, it used to be cubicle. Now it's a beautiful room in our house that was temperature controlled to what we have. We're not fighting over the thermometer with our other workers.
Right.
All we've done is we've just said, let's make a beautiful cubicle. Right? We've taken a place and says, I need to sit in a place where I'm comfortable for a couple hours. I need to be staring at a screen for a couple hours. Here's this for an idea. What if you were more productive asynchronously? What if instead of saying, in order to get this done, I need 3 hours of intense focus, rather we had a paradigm where work was done in little spurts, where you didn't actually feel like you were working. I'll give you an example. There are so many tasks that I have that I solve it in my mind and think of all the ways that I might respond to the email, or I might get the task done, or I might go to the page and get 3/4 of it done. But I keep those in mind until I go and sit down at a desk or on a couch and pull up my laptop. But imagine if those things happened while I'm thinking of them. Imagine if all those small little spare moments of my day, when I'm crossing the road, when I'm sitting on a train, when I'm in the middle of a rowboat, in the middle of a lake, all meditative and in a beautiful space, and I'm in my most creative. If instead of spoiling that with thinking that the only way I'm productive is if I'm sitting down looking at a screen and realizing that The new paradigm is when the screen works for us, when computers work for us, where we become the masters. Not because we're running after the right place to be focused, but rather every moment is a moment that stuff gets done in the background. It happens around us.
We see it.
Yes.
We see it already. Like the virtual assistants.
Yep.
That's what they're doing.
Yep.
Right. The fact that I can be sweeping the floor or cooking dinner or shooting a basketball in the park and be like, say the words that you don't say to trigger. And you say that, and then you can just call someone, or you can even send someone money. Like whatever it is, you can do those things seamlessly without even stopping the activity you're doing. There's tremendous value in them because you're not taking yourself, a lot of it is focus. It's not about time, right? It's not about the time we have, because really most of us, we don't maximize the time we're supposed to. We live in such a distracted world. There's so much that can be done in 1 second. And I think that's where balance is necessary, because having the virtual assistants, whether you're using Google or using Apple, Siri, or whatever it is, whenever you're doing, whichever assistant you're using, it can be really helpful or it could be used to be lazy.
Yeah.
But no question about it, taking menial tasks that used to take 5 steps to do and brought it down to 2 or even 1 step, which is brilliant. It takes away the distraction. And you're describing just a whole nother level of it, which, to be honest, sounds really scary because it goes into the realm of the chips, the brain, and the chips in the brain, and Bill Gates and all that stuff, and all the conspiracy.
Everything's scary when you can take any topic and make it a conspiracy.
The unknown is,
unknown, scary. The idea, also like the idea of something always listening. Well, instead of sitting down and questioning is something always listening, let's move to a company or move to a product where we know it's always listening, but it's listening to our benefit, and we have the controls to turn it on or off.
This is a funny turn of events, but I was listening to a rabbi speak, and he was saying, like, people are always so scared about, if you said, like he was saying, for example, if you send money on Cash App, right, then they know, because like with Cash App, like, come, like, you're not going to find anything. If you live in a way where all your dealings are good, upright way. So
what are you nervous about?
Yeah. And sure, there are things that need private conversations, and that's where you have a private conversation without any of these things. I think, I'll tell you, this is totally going off topic, but I think that I used to want to have my bedroom be fully automated and all the HomeKit stuff. And at some point, I'm like, no, the bedroom is the one place that's none of that. I don't want any Wi-Fi, none of it, because there has to be a place where it's just none of that. One place, especially when you're sleeping, you want to have a place where there's none of these waves, not much you could do. Some people, they turn off their Wi-Fi at night. They try to minimize all that stuff because you have to think about those things. I don't know if it's even helpful to fight this unless you're going totally off the grid. I don't know if it's like practically, as much as whether you like it or not, it's here. So the question is, how do you use it to your benefit, like you said?
Yeah.
How does it serve you instead of you serving it?
Yeah, which is a big thing of what this paradigm is. And you're talking about that in the sense of privacy and getting out of control. But it's a very big part of it also of how we are used to thinking of what computers are for. And computers have become incredibly powerful, but we've learned how to work in someone else's user interface. Someone's designed an application that works a certain way that gets the job done 70% of the way, which we then have to find another application to finish off the last little bit. And then we're like cobbling together different work in 2-3 different applications that don't speak to each other, trying to get one job done, and moving that to a world where the world is connected, but in a natural and seamless way, where we almost come down here. Sometimes we get to a place, and coming back to your thoughts on being focused and this idea of creating a space where you can be zen and get into focus, and that's where people create for their world. Some people think I need the latest gadgets in order to be productive. And you touched upon how sometimes getting into certain jobs, it might take a few days, or it might be hard with certain pieces. And a lot of that is the barriers that either our devices still lack, like we don't have a device that does everything that we need it to have. So we feel like we can only be productive when we get that latest piece. We need to get that newest microphone and the latest microphones that hovers exactly the right place. And soon we need flying drones that carry our bags. We're always waiting for that latest piece of technology that can help us get our work done. And therefore we wait, because the technology is there to serve us. The problem is that we're running around looking for technology to get work done, and we end up becoming the slaves. We end up becoming those
We
who
do so much preparatory work.
exactly,
Just
which
to-
stops us from getting actual work done.
Yeah, yeah.
Like for me, that's a big thing that stops my podcast, where my brain stream, I engineered it in such a way that it's supposed to be done non-scripted. And there's not a focus on the microphone, just get it started. And that's why I like this idea over here. It's a big part of it. Don't wait until you go buy that fanciest dial or that fanciest control panel that changes between the different microphone inputs and things. You can use whatever you have lying around your house, and those get infused with a magical essence aspect.
Appointment. Magical appointment. You're appointing this thing
to do another task that it wasn't made for originally. But it's recycling. But now you've got
That's funny.
it's the ultimate form of recycling. But recycle, use augmented reality, spend thousands of dollars. But it's like there's so many items. I'm just looking around the room, and to us, they look like just generic, dumb, simple objects. And if you're actually an animator at Disney a few decades ago, you would look around the items around your house, and suddenly you would come up with Beauty and the Beast a few months later. There's this idea that items around us could be infused with a life. Now, in Beauty and the Beast, those items actually have full-on characters, right? They become actual living beings.
That's very interesting.
If we could do that with technology, where we're breathing a new sense of life into all these gadgets around our house, things that are not necessary. There was this idea that I was looking into, like in the car, of bringing new interfaces using the current upholstery or the curvature of things around you. Everybody moved away from buttons and everybody moved into this flat screen that is very dangerous if you're going at fast speeds. If you don't actually have a feedback of a dial that you can put your hand on and now I can control it. If you require the touchscreen in order to, and look at when you're changing a dial or anything like that, it becomes dangerous at high speeds. And so there was this idea of what if I use the materials around me, the upholstery, like where my hands naturally rested, and use them as input. So a big, very interesting part is the steering wheel. We don't have screens all over the steering wheel. We've got buttons where our hands are. But imagine if the round steering wheel, wherever our hands are, could become that interface. Wherever our hands are actually naturally resting at that point, whether it's at 10 and 2, whether it's one hand just resting at the bottom, whether we're using the yoke and the hands are in different places, a control panel could come out from underneath our hands, knowing exactly how our thumbs move or hands move up and down. And suddenly we have digital dials and digital buttons that are augmented, that appear when we are interested in using that interface. And now we've got the squishiness of the steering wheel to give you that feedback or that clicking back. And we can put haptics on the inside of the steering wheel that there already is on a Tesla. It vibrates if you don't touch it, if you're on autopilot for too long. If you have that, you now have a whole new interface that doesn't require you to always look there. That's naturally underneath your hands. And it's using the texture of the steering wheel, which coupled together with haptics gives you a very good sense of a scroll or a clicking wheel. And you could have different measures of how fast is clicking, how slow. And that could be a very interesting way of bringing in interfaces that before were forced onto buttons, and now they happen to be where your hands are. And so this idea of connecting items is saying what around you could become that interface. How can the world around you, that it just exists, how can it serve you at this time, instead of going out and buying that newest gadget for a couple $100 that has one purpose and one purpose only? This is an idea, right? Here's a figurine. Imagine if a figurine that was pointing in one direction set a focus mode on my phone, right? My focus mode was set by where that figurine was pointed.
Mm-hmm.
And if I twisted it 180 or if I twisted it to the wall, now it's gone onto like work mode. And this analogy of closing my eyes, not looking at the world around me and focusing, that analogy is using something in the physical space to enact something in the digital world. That's just a wild example of using something, but
I mean, in that case, it would also be an extra step because like your eyes are better than...
Yeah, every item around you crafts an input. And here it's going, what if the entire world becomes that input and not necessarily created for it, but now become part of it, whether it's because of the physics it has, the materials, the texture, whether it's how it looks, where it's placed. All these different things can come into a place where they now control something that you wouldn't have thought of before. Let's say there's a pole right there, right? That's an annoyance. It's there in order to hold up the roof.
That's right. It's like, why? What's it doing there?
What's it doing there? But that post can now become an indicator of anything. We
Yeah.
can use that it could change color to indicate X, Y, Z. It could indicate I've got new mail coming in. It doesn't have to be a flashing light in front of me. It could be a very simple thing that's in my peripheral. It could have different icons scrolling on it. It could flash different colors. It could have items that go on behind it.
That particular use case would require some kind of lens. I'm saying eyeglasses.
Yeah, a big part of this is, yes, thinking about this is the world where you are wearing a pair of glasses or augmented reality glasses and understanding the world around you and imbuing life force into everything around you, where those things become your controls. An item like this,
What's this?
An item like this, like a coffee cup, let's say, or a limonada cup.
Limonada.
This straw inside.
Because Avraham just discovered limonada. And if you haven't heard of one, check it out.
It's actually amazing. But if we look at this, it looks like a Starbucks cup. There are so many things size small. This thing, I've already finished drinking, right? So I could put it in the bin.
Or you could recycle it.
Or I could recycle it. Or I could augment cycle it. I could give it a new life in the digital world. I could really recycle it. Real cycle. Exactly. This item becomes an interface into the world. And there's hundreds of different ways of interfacing it. I could use the inside empty space to show me a hologram of some character trapped in there doing something, right? Or my memories are there, or a reminder comes out of there. And it's using the metaphor of trapped inside because there's a lid. And maybe when I open up the lid, I'm releasing something, and that means another part of the metaphor that is inside of this interface. Or the straw inside of it is allowing oxygen to flow through what was previously locked. That means something else. So that could embody something else in the interface, right? But then you have the physicality, right? I could now scroll my hand around it. I could rotate this on top on the desk. I could have information around it that are being projected. I can have a lid that I can swipe between or move and see controls and dials, or a circular dial that might control something. What I'm saying is there are 101 ways that you can use this plastic device.
My question is, how would the settings for that look like? There would be settings of like surfaces, right? You choose surfaces and you choose like function for surface, right? And then you would be like rotate or tap, or right. There would have to be like, I guess the combination can go up to.
A big part of it would be, what are you connecting it with?
Right. That's true also. Wait, so what are you connecting? Meaning what are you controlling? But then also, like, you could potentially have, with all those combinations, hundreds of different possibilities for functions.
Exactly.
That's wild. What learning curve would that be?
So that's a big thing. A part of the learning curve is how you design it.
Mm-hmm.
In that interface could start appearing as you move. For example, you have the HomePod, right? The HomePod Mini.
Yeah.
And there's rumors coming out that they're going to be soon releasing a HomePod with a screen on top. So now you can think of like you're having artwork, or you might have widgets on there.
One without a wire or stuff.
Oh, hopefully soon. But this idea of a speaker without a screen has certain functionality, but now you add the screen, it has a lot more.
Right.
But again, that's the screen on the top. But if the speaker had a screen around it, now you can have area for showing waveform, you could show volume, you could show excitement, you could show lights. And now what happens if this speaker could cast a projection onto the table around it? Now this table becomes an entire expression of the music video that's happening. Maybe the music video is about oil, I don't know. You could see oil pouring out of the speaker, digital oil, but it would look like oil pouring out and going onto the table and then dripping onto the floor. That entire thing is happening out of a piece of technology that nowadays you wouldn't even think about anything like that, because it doesn't even have a screen. It doesn't have any idea. And also a screen is limited to that item.
How do you separate between reality and virtual reality at that point?
I'm not sure if Apple has the right approach of this little dial that goes between them. For me, more, I see the distinction between those two worlds more, and I'm talking about when we're getting to a worlds of like contact lenses.
Right.
The difference between them will be like opening and closing your eyes. If you wanted to go to virtual, you'd close your eyes. If you want to be augmented, you would open your eyes.
But it could be like, meaning something could be on fire, and this is a crazy idea. You could choose to have something going on fire, and then meanwhile, it actually caught fire and you have no clue because you think you're watching. all the safety features you would need, and maybe there's never a feature you could never see something on fire, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I don't know how we're going to necessarily tackle that. One thing I can think of is make the fire look quite digital. So it would hover and not show that it's connected to a source.
Make enough separation where it's noticeably not hyper realistic.
Yeah, maybe with certain things that could be dangerous, but I'm not sure. I don't necessarily know if I want to put limitations on, but I think, yeah, there would need to be, because the idea is that you're merging those two together. Can you, again, I guess it comes back to that point. What happens if you use it for bad, if you use it for good?
Like Apple Vision Pro, again, going back to it one more time, like the feature where you can literally sit in a place where something happened and have it replay in front of your eyes, that's scary.
How immersed you are is the difference in augmented reality and virtual reality. Yeah. If you're sitting in a world, let's say you're sitting in one of the communities around the Gaza envelope, right after October 7th, and sit in a chair and literally see the horrors unfold around you as you sit in the chair.
Yeah.
That's full on augmented reality. If you did that at your home, sitting on your couch, and had the same experience, that's virtual reality. Now, there's the augmented reality and virtual reality are on a spectrum, right? Where base reality is on one end, right? The real world that we live in, and complete virtual reality is at the other end.
Virtual reality is still very much a prison.
A prison?
Like you mentioned, that you have to be in certain, just like a computer.
You want to be in a controlled environment to experience virtual reality, because you don't want to do anything dangerous in the real world.
I mean, you see these videos of people who they see a world in front of them and they decide to dive, and they dive right into their TV or right into their table. And it's not going to happen with AR.
Hopefully not. Because again,
you're looking at the world in front of you.
Again, the world is a spectrum. Augmented reality could be as simple as just seeing a virtual button on the table that does something, up until the whole point that my entire surrounding could look very different, where I could say, hey, I'm in a basement, but I want to make this look like I'm in a Victorian castle. Now, by me sitting here and the couch just morphing and the walls morphing and everything, but everything's in the same place where I could like literally walk around the room and not bump into anything, that's still augmented reality.
Yeah, but it's a perfect combination of virtual and augmented.
Yeah, but it's still, again, it's that spectrum.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important. There's a spectrum where it's between base reality and full virtual reality. And augmented reality is a slider on that spectrum.
Yeah. The difference is, are you using limitations around you to dictate everything else? That's AR. And then virtual reality is where you're just totally disregarding that, and you're just in a different reality regardless of if you're standing next to a clip. You know what I mean?
And that's where, if I was in a room and I made the room look like it was in a different era and different characters, and it was convincing,
right? But
I could walk around the room. Again, that knob, augmented reality on that slider, is like nearly at virtual reality. It's 98%.
Yeah.
Virtual reality, I could say, let me fly anywhere. But again, are you sitting down? Are you flying? Are you feeling? All those different things are just different parts of it.
If you show me a sofa in virtual reality, I try to sit down on the sofa, I fall on my butt. In an AR, the sofa you're sitting on right now will just look, I don't know, like the Czar's sofa in 1800, and it's like this lavish.
But again, I could be sitting here and add another couch, and that couch is completely virtual, but it's in the augmented space.
Yeah, okay.
So that, again,
that's where it gets.
It's very murky, and a big part of this is that Apple is right in the sense that augmented reality and virtual reality are going to be one device, right? They are going to merge. Again, if you think about it like a contact lens, the difference between augmented reality and virtual reality and my contact lens, if I want to be binary, is augmented reality, my eyes are open to the world around me. Virtual reality is when I completely close my eyes. But again, it's not binary, it's a spectrum.
But I also think that
it's a slider.
Yeah, but AR is much more, from what I'm understanding and what I think, AR is much more geared towards practicality.
Yes.
And it's not an escape as much as it is a utility, whereas VR is just take me somewhere else.
True, but it works also the inverse, right? So my focus on augmented reality is very much in the productive. It's very much in the utility. I'm looking at it from the operating system, from the computer, getting work done, beyond the smartphone, beyond the tablet, beyond the desktop, beyond the current wave of flat 2D screens into this world. And I look at augmented reality from what is after them. But you could be in a virtual reality world, which is a complete simulation, and it's there to be for utility, where you're sitting on your couch at home, but you feel like you're piloting a Cessna. Full-on simulation is virtual reality. And then you have augmented reality where you could have games, where you could have little critters running around. They just happen to use your space.
That's true. Yeah.
So you definitely have both of them. Again, and this is why I come back, and I always come back and define augmented reality is just a slider in between base reality and complete virtual reality. And where that comes along that slider, that's unlimited. And in a way, that's why you have mobile AR exists on that spectrum, right? Mobile AR just happens to be
Screen in order
you
to
have to look
see
at the
it
screen, you
in
have
the
to look,
room.
and you're looking through your screen because the computer so it's still augmented reality. It's just pseudo augmented reality. I would define the Vision Pro to be pseudo augmented reality, which is you're not looking at base reality, right? Real reality. You're
Not looking through glass.
you're looking through a screen. Now, the field of view is very big. The resolution is very crisp. It's Retina display, ultra high, whatever new buzzwords Apple comes out to make it better than Retina. You're not looking at the real world. There's a pane of glass in between you and the real world.
I mean, if you turned off the screen, you wouldn't see anything.
Yeah. You would be blind. Coming back to this idea of like connecting two devices, what I find interesting is that it's something that we don't think about today. Today, if we want something to be electronic, it's built for that. It's expensive. It's got circuitry inside of it. It does a very specific thing. You want to go from the Rodecaster 1, Rodecaster 2. A company's built that. They've created that. There's a lot of thought and effort goes into that. And a lot of the work is in the hardware. And I'm not knocking that, and it's very important. Electronics are important. But I'm saying there's what we'll be able to do to connect items, to make a light switch out of anything that's next to us, so we don't have to stand up and actually control the light switch, and we're controlling it in a spatial way. The light switch and the light are in two different dimensions, right? One's vertical, one's horizontal, right? One's bunched up in the wall, one is scattered on a roof. And the connection between them is not apparent, right? There's no line that goes, this light goes to that. We usually find it out by trial and error. Augmented reality, I can control it by pointing at it, or I can have a little item next to me that can now control a bunch of parameters on it. And I can also control it with the voice. The idea is we want to get to a point which is as seamless as possible. Like you don't even want to necessarily think about it.
How do you think this would create a divide between the rich class and think about it?
You're asking a very interesting question. Are the enhanced and non-enhanced, right? The people that embrace AI, the people that embrace the computer, the computational power.
That's people who can afford to embrace it. Some people have that choice.
Technology is always coming down. Would you ever have believed that you have in your pocket a computer that's a million times more powerful than the computer that was used to send men to the moon a few decades ago?
You don't think this can create a real divide and a real power?
Of course it can.
Okay.
But what we've seen before is, in the very beginning, only the rich and powerful could afford a BlackBerry. And now every other person on the subway who might not be able to afford rent for that month, they have the latest, flashiest
But that's
smartphone.
not a good thing. It's not a good thing.
It might not be, but they have access to it.
Yeah, well, access is at all-time high, no question.
What you do with it, all those things is another thing. But the
Access
fact
is
is that you have access. Okay, I want to wrap this up. We're coming up close to an hour. I think this was super interesting. And there's a lot more. What I would say to you guys at home, look around your house right now and look at the most mundane item around you. It could be a toilet roll, a pen. It could be a pillow. Think of what things could now be added to that give that extra power. Imagine tapping that to your computer or a microphone or a speaker. Imagine being able to control your lights, the fan, different colored lights, the sound coming out of your computer, turning on and off stoves, turning on and off lights. Maybe the string next to you can now become something where just using your fingers, you might be able to scroll with it or move things around or make connections. What could happen when you can connect, quote unquote, those two items and breathe a life between them? What conversation are they having with each other? Previously, one who was inanimate and one who was a smart device, a digital and an electronic. What kind of conversations could they now have that one could talk to the other and say, hey, do this, show this?
I just want to say, I wonder how that would branch into education.
That's for another podcast episode. For you guys who want to know how this looks like in education, follow us at Reality One. Subscribe, share it with all your friends.
Smash the like button. I don't know, are we doing that here?
We could definitely smash that like button. Share it with all your friends. We're going to go into education. But for today, thank you so much, Yossi, for joining us. I'll see you guys in the future.